remember it quite clearly, Simon saying, it was something like, if the goals that you've written down don't scare you, they're not big enough goals, or something to that effect. And the reason I was able to get that significant below market value purchase price agreed was due to the circumstances of the seller. Then the cash flow from all three properties combined, obviously when property 3 is at the end state, would be just over £32,000 per annum.
Let's put your hands together and welcome Rob Stevens.
So, quick introduction. So my name is Rob Stevens. I'd just like to start out by giving you a little bit of detail about my background and how I got into property and how I eventually ended up here on Mastermind 30. So what I do for my day job is I work in software sales. I sell governance, risk and compliance software to the financial services sector based in London. I've always had a keen interest in kind of financial freedom, which started from reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, as most people do. And I've kind of dabbled in everything that you can think of trying to achieve that financial freedom position, including internet marketing. I've sold affiliate products online, or tried to, basically. I've lost money in pyramid schemes, Ponzi schemes. If you can name it, I've lost money doing it. I've definitely tried it all. So how I got started in property. So I attended my first PIN meeting in Sheffield, which is my hometown. And I actually met a guy who's a close friend of mine now who had a small portfolio of HMOs, and he actually lived in one himself, so that's how he got started, similar to Simon and many other people. I was renting an apartment at that time. I was spending about £750 per calendar month on rent and bills, which was the majority of my salary at that time, working in Sheffield. So following meeting my new friend and attending the PIN meeting, I actually purchased my first property. I paid £104,000 for that on a 90% loan-to-value residential mortgage. And then I actually converted that into a 4-bed HMO. Oh, actually, just to go a little bit further, so I bought that with £5,000 of my own savings, and I borrowed the remainder from my parents. And I actually converted that to a 4-bed HMO with the furnishings, fire doors and smoke alarms and so forth, paid for on kind of credit cards and things like that. And then I moved into the attic room and rented out the rooms below, as you do. And that gave me kind of a profit of £250 per calendar month, which actually gave me a £1,000 per month swing in my personal circumstances, which was really, really significant at that time and allowed me to, move forward. So what I did after that is I discovered the power of interest-free credit cards in a little bit more detail. So I don't know if it's actually true, but someone told me that if you get multiple browsers open with different credit card applications and press the apply button at the same time, they all run the credit check without the knowledge of any of the other searches on your file. So that's what I did. I applied for as many credit cards as I could find that had interest-free periods on them. And I managed to get into a position where I had £40,000 worth of spending power on credit cards with 18 to 24 months interest-free periods, some of which had money transfer options as well, which were very useful for paying contractors and so forth. So that allowed me to basically transfer all my spending onto those credit cards. I did things like I'd go on work trips, pay for all the expenses, and then have expenses reimbursed back into my current account, saved up a deposit again very, very quickly, and bought my second house within the year for £100,000 on a 75% buy-to-let mortgage. Did a full refurb to a 4-bed HMO, decided to do the majority of work myself, which I thought was a good idea at the time, which, as you can see from the top photos there, probably wasn't the best idea that I've ever had, but it did end up okay in the end. Again, I moved into that one, into the attic room, rented out all the ones below, and rented out my previous room. So that's kind of how I got started in property. But then I kind of received a job opportunity that I couldn't refuse to move to London, and that was a great opportunity for myself and also my partner Maria, who I believe is watching online today. So I decided to take that opportunity and move to London. But unfortunately, there was no agents taking on room-by-room HMO management at the time. So me being kind of a lord profile and having difficulty letting go from things, I decided to self-manage those HMOs from London. From London, well, those HMOs were in Sheffield. And that was a very difficult challenge. I was doing viewings while I was working from home and so forth. There were actually times when I was sat doing conference calls in my car while waiting for a tenant to turn up to come and do a viewing. And then the wonderful Section 24 was announced. And what that would have meant for me is when fully implemented, 70% of my profits from my property income would have been disappearing into income tax, which was really, really frustrating for me and a big blow given how hard I was working kind of doing that. So then that turned my focus to my corporate career, and I kind of fell out of love with property a little bit for all that stress, that aggro, and then losing 70% of the value of my profits in tax. I had a really good year the first year. I broke all my company's sales records. I ended that year absolutely exhausted, burned out, stressed, but in the fortunate position of having £120,000 in cash savings at the end of that year. So then I was thinking to myself, well, how do I move forward? I knew I wanted to invest in property. I knew property was the way forward. I just had no idea how. So how do I invest that £120,000? I was thinking, do I buy a home for myself in London, for myself and Maria, which was what we really wanted to do? Do I invest that £120,000 in your property? If so, how? What strategy? I hated HMOs at the time. I was definitely a tired landlord. And I was even thinking about selling my HMOs at that time as well. I thought it would be a very, very sensible decision to take some financial advice and find out what I should do in this situation. And I was advised that the best thing to do in my position was to invest in inner city off-plan apartments due to the passive nature of those investments, rather than buy a home, rather than do anything else. And I was given a good business case in terms of why that was the best way forward and why houses weren't as lucrative and so forth. So I had three options at that time. It was either buy my own home for myself and Maria, invest passively with a financial advisor, or it was invest in my education and go on Mastermind. And I did go to a couple of PIN meetings to evaluate that last option there, but it all seemed like a little bit too much hard work at the time, given how pleased I was feeling about myself with my corporate career. So I decided to go for option number 2 there, and I invested £100,000 with the financial advisor into off-plan apartments in Liverpool. So Mastermind, so actually fast forward a year of delays and frustration in investing, and I decided to attend the accelerator in February 2020, which I believe was the last face-to-face accelerator, and I actually signed up for Mastermind 30 on that day. I attended the first workshop in October, and I remember Simon going through the process where we write down our goals on the first day of what we want to achieve. So I wrote down the following goals at that point. So I wanted to move from being what I call a do-it-yourself landlord to a professional property investor, as that was really key for me for this year. I also wanted to buy a small home for myself and Maria, just something to start us out and something to keep us going for a year or two. In addition to that, I wanted to hit the £50,000 target from the Mastermind year from deals secured. But then I can remember it quite clearly, Simon saying it was something like, if the goals that you've written down don't scare you, they're not big enough goals, or something to that effect. And I was really inspired at the time, and so I crossed out first home, and I wrote dream home. And I also crossed out £50,000, and I wrote £100,000 from the MM year. So I was really kind of inspired at that point, to going at 100 mile an hour towards my goals. I've had a few challenges along the way, particularly at the start of the Mastermind journey. A few people in the room kind of know what I'm going to say next. It usually comes out after a couple of beers or so the repeat offenders have heard this story a couple of times. But I think it was on the Monday before workshop number 2, just before, I actually found out that I'd lost the £100,000 that I'd invested in those apartments. And that was a huge blow to my mindset at the time. And I started to really doubt myself in terms of my ability to make decisions, my ability to accurately evaluate deals, invest, and make the right decisions. And in addition to that, I'd also we were in November, and I were at 20% of my annual sales target in the year for my corporate career. As due to COVID, nobody was buying what I was selling. So I was in a position where I had probably more than 40% reduction in my earned income at the time, due to lockdown and the pandemic. And many of our competitors were releasing salespeople due to no sales and no work. But fortunately enough, my company, I work for a great company, and they looked after us very well. But that had significant impact on my mindset and my start to the Mastermind journey. And I really started to doubt myself, investing, but also Mastermind in general as well, due to that experience. And I remember there was one coaching call I had with Billy, where I think I said something like, have I just been sold a Mickey Mouse course here? Motivated sellers, PLO, do me a favor, all this sort of thing. So, and it reminds me of that now every time we speak. So, but I did actually say that. So, in terms of the goals that I'd set the week before, those goals went completely out the window at that point. And my new goal was basically just to get through the mastermind year and then restart, after the pandemic. So those are just a few challenges that I had. And again, I don't mean those to be any sort of sub story or anything like that. As we've already heard today, many other people have lost way more than any amount of money can ever amount to. But it's just more the mindset challenges that I had when speaking to landlords and trying to secure deals. So just to move on to a couple of the deals that I've been working on in the mastermind year. So the first deal was a 4-bed HMOs. So I decided to stick to HMOs, to stick to what I know, as it was really important for me at that time to get some quick wins on the mastermind year. And 4-bed HMOs were the best way to do that. So the first property I acquired was an off-market property from a tiled landlord. This was someone I knew who had just fallen out of love with property due to family reasons and so forth. It was a fully tenanted HMO, purchase price of £135,000, 75% loan-to-value HMO mortgage on that. Total money in that I invested, including the deposit, the stamp duty, the legals and so forth, was just over £40,000. That cash flows me £625 per calendar month and gives me a return on investment of 18% of the money that I invested into that deal. So very nice and easy, fully tenanted, no work, furniture was included in the purchase price and everything like that, so that was a great deal to start off with. Deal number 2 was a 4-bed HMO, funnily enough, directly across the road from the one that you've just seen. And this was on market in plain sight, so this was just on Rightmove, on market property, but stacked to convert again to a 4-bed HMO. So 3-bed terrace house, converted to a 4-bed HMO, purchase price of £138,500. It needed a light refurb and furnishings and compliance for a 4-bed HMO of £14,000. So total money into this deal, including stamp, refurb, deposit, etc., legals, was £54,000. And that cash flows me about £875 per calendar month and gives me a 19% return on the money I invested in that deal. And there's a couple of photos of how that turned out in the end. Third and final deal that I'll talk about in this presentation is a 7-bed HMO. So this was an off-market HMO from a motivated seller. Found this by sending landlord letters. So they do work, as we've heard already. And funnily enough, this was the first batch of landlord letters I ever sent out. And I actually used the classic Simon Zutshi boilerplate letter, the exact copy that you download from the course, just with my name on the bottom. And I remember the way that the seller contacted me is he actually sent me an email and he'd scanned my letter and somebody else's letter next to each other. And he thought we were business partners because they were absolutely identical, just with 2 different names at the bottom. And obviously I said no and so forth. But at that time, the property had sold to another investor off market. But the difference is I followed up and the other guy didn't. So in 6 months' time, I followed up and the sale had just fallen through. So I had the ability to get in there and get a deal done. And I haven't got enough time to go through the full details of this deal, unfortunately, in this presentation. But just to give you a high-level overview, so it's a 7-bed existing HMO. It's leased as an asylum seeker let to an organisation managing asylum seeker lets. The purchase price I have agreed is £160,000. The open market value of this property is £295,000. And the reason I was able to get that significant below market value purchase price agreed was due to the circumstances of the seller not paying a mortgage for many, many years, and he's actually got over £500,000 worth of debt on the account with the first charge holder on that property. And again, I'll need all day to go through the full details of this deal, so I'll just keep it quick just for here. So GDV of £400,000 with possession, with a refurb and let as a high-end HMO. So all these figures have kind of come from Rick's valuations and surveyors. So it's got an open market value today of 295 and a GDV of £400,000 plus with a refurb and relet and with an increased rental level as well. It's quite a complex deal in terms of the structure. So it's no money down deal. So the total buying cost initially, £170,000 with the purchase price, stamp duty, and the legals. The way that this is funded is bridging finance, gross loan of £144,000 with a net loan of £122,000, and then £50,000 worth of private investor loan funding, which gives me just over the total buying cost value there. The plan is to refinance this initially based on the current market value of 295 on a commercial mortgage, with a loan amount of 221,250, and an equity release after paying back the private investor and the gross loan on the bridging of £26,250. And that would then cash flow at that point with the current rental agreement in place, roughly about £250 per calendar month. And then phase 2 of this deal is to regain possession once the lease expires, refurb, so it only needs kind of cosmetic stuff doing. It's got all the compliance stuff already in place, so that's estimated high-level figures of £30,000 for a gross development value of £400,000, refinanced at 75% loan to value, which would pull out £78,250. When you take away the refurb costs, that's left with an equity release of £48,750. And then that would cash flow roughly £1,200 per calendar month once that's relet to as a high-end HMO with an infinite return on investment. So in terms of a summary of the results, so instead of just going through financial figures, I'd like to go back and have a look at the goals that I'd written off at the start of the year due to my challenges. So goal 1 was move from being a do-it-yourself landlord to a professional property investor. So what I've achieved so far is I've got control of my tax position. I've got a specialist property tax accountant that I've was introduced to from my coach as part of the PINT network. I've also restructured my current portfolio, so I've sold my 2 personally owned properties to my limited company, eliminating my tax liability from Section 24. In terms of portfolio management, I've managed to kind of get myself away from the hassle of managing my HMOs, which was causing me to be potentially a motivated seller a few years ago. So phase 1 was to work on everything that you have to be on the ground with. So every physical interaction with the property, I managed to build a power team, have emergency contractors, and I work with some other landlords who help me with viewings, tenant finds, and check-ins and so forth. So phase 1 was everything that you needed to be physically at the property for, removing that work from myself. And then phase 2 of that was to get a virtual assistant to basically replace myself with all the administration. So I currently manage all the tenancies and so forth, and it's still a lot of work. But phase 2 is to get a VA to replace myself from those admin activities. And again, I would have no idea how to even think about getting a VA without kind of mastermind course. Also, in terms of angel investors, private investors, I've built solid relationships with investors who have kind of successfully raised private finance, which I never thought I would ever be able to do, and that process is becoming easier and easier as you go through the journey. Goal 2 was to buy our dream home. So in June, on 25th of June, myself and Maria completed our dream home in Sheffield, somewhere where we'll. Thank you very much. Somewhere where I think we can be happy for 20 plus years and raise a family and so forth. And that was the opportunity that I'd missed and given up to invest in those apartments. Final goal was to earn £100,000 from property deals that I'd secured in the year. So just to give you a quick summary of those 3 deals. Profit from so end value of all those properties combined would be £690,000. Profit from equity release, so one-time profit from the 3rd HMO deal there will be £75,000, and then the cash flow from all 3 properties combined, obviously when property 3 is at the end state, would be just over £32,000 per annum. So top tips. So my top tips are made up of basically top tips that have helped me. Things that I haven't done, which I know would have propelled me further forward if I'd have done them. And then also some top tips that I stole from the Mastermind 29 case studies because I couldn't think of anything else to put down. So first one, don't compare yourself to others. I do this a lot. I always compare myself to other people and not focus on my own goals. So set clear goals that are personal to you and run your own race, not somebody else's. Also leverage the power of the PIN network. So, I found, the knowledge, the community, the support available, in this room and from the coaches and Simon and Andy and everybody here. You can't get that anywhere else, and it's such a fortunate position to be on Mastermind to have access to all these people. Take advantage of your coach. So one of the best things about Mastermind for me is, my coach, Billy Turriff, has been absolutely phenomenal in helping me on my journey and get through some of my challenges. And you just can't put a value on having someone with that experience at the end of the phone, every 2 weeks. It's absolutely invaluable. So take advantage of that and don't waste a single call. Don't be afraid to fail. As you only fail. I know that's a cliche saying, but you only fail if you give up. And if you don't give up, then there is no such thing as failure. Don't let your emotions make decisions for you. So again, this is one thing that I do is my emotions make my decision for me. I've been a motivated buyer. I've almost been a motivated seller, and then I've allowed bad decisions to influence decisions that I'd be making in the moment. So try not to let emotions make decisions for you. Make them with your head and not your heart. And be relentless working towards your goals. Success is closer than you think. No matter how far you think you are away, success is only around the corner. And then finally, never ever give up. A couple of thank yous. So I'd just like to thank Simon, Andy, and everybody else in this room. I wouldn't have got through the year without you guys. Obviously, the MM family. And then my coach, Billy Turriff, as I've already mentioned, has been absolutely fantastic throughout the process. And then most importantly, my fiancée, Maria, who I believe is watching from home. Thank you very much.
I do hope you got massive value from watching this YouTube video. I'd encourage you to click on the link below to come and do the online training with me. And I've got another video lined up for you, which I think is also going to be really useful that you should watch once you've registered for the online training with me. So invest with knowledge, invest with skill. I'll see you very soon.